Welcome to another kind of 360 lecture here. I obviously am not Christopher Perry. He couldn't make this lecture and everything, so I'll be presenting kind of his research and his PowerPoints a little bit. So we're kind of co-presenting here a little bit. He did all the work and I get to present it. So my name is Luke. I'm the fitness specialist at Ability 360 Sports and Fitness Center, and we're going to hop into recovery tonight. We are co-hosting with Move United in our kind of hashtag Adapt at Home fitness series, and this is kind of our lecture part held on Thursday nights, and we're talking about recovery tonight. So a little bit about Chris. If you don't know Christopher Perry, I can go to the next slide. There we go. A little bit about Christopher Perry. He was born on the East Coast. He's got several degrees in exercise science, and he's working on his PhD in exercise science right now. And then he's also has experience as a strength and conditioning coach for about 13 years, and in a large variety of different populations and everything. So that's Chris. If you want to know a little bit about me, these are a few pictures. I love hanging out with friends and family. I love getting outdoors, and of course I love exercise and lifting. So these are a few fun pictures of my family, and I'm also obsessed with Disney and everything, so that is my best impersonation of the Lion King on top of that rock there. That's at South Mountain. So if you guys ever go there, just picture me there. So I got my degree from Grand Canyon University in 2018, and I've been a personal trainer and strength coach for about 5 years, working on getting more and more certifications and experience in adaptive sports and so on and so forth. All right, so talking about recovery, it can be kind of complicated depending on, what does rest look like and how much rest do you need, and it all kind of depends on your training goals. So if you're a professional athlete, you may need a different type of rest. If you're someone who's looking just to kind of maintain fitness, you may need a different type of recovery as well. What does active recovery and passive recovery kind of look like? And we're going to dive into each one of these little pictures tonight. So why is recovery important? Because we don't want to get hurt. So no one likes getting hurt. No one likes having to sit out or anything like that. So we want to make sure that we recover properly, we rest, we give the body its time that it needs to recover. And we're also going to dive into that a little bit. And sometimes when people will take January, for example, when January kind of comes, we get a lot of those New Year's resolutions and people jump back into the gym really full force. They've built up a lot of energy for it, and they last about 3 weeks. And after about 3 weeks, they either burn out, or it's just too much, or they might get hurt or even injured. And so sometimes more is not always better. And so someone told me, and this kind of applies to recovery, is if you were going to eat an elephant, how would you do it? And the answer is one small bite at a time. One small bite at a time. So that's just like exercise and fitness and everything. You can't just go in and expect to be super fit all of a sudden right off the bat. And so you want to take little steps as you go, and then the more and more active you become, you incorporate that recovery, and your body gets better at recovering. You can keep trying new options for fitness. So we're going to talk about a little bit about kind of keeping optimal performance, and what Chris has been talking about with periodization these past couple of weeks with a strength program, and how does that look like? How do you program recovery? So overview, we're just going to talk about program design, some recovery modalities, some post-workout recovery. So after your workout, what should you do? I am not a dietitian in any means. I have some nutrition knowledge, but I'm not going to tell you what to eat exactly. It all depends on your goals and your fitness kind of dreams, etc. So, but we will touch on a little bit of nutrition and maybe some quick absorbing items and some slower absorbing items. And then of course, one of my favorite topics that I never get enough of is sleep. Sleep is super important when it comes to recovery. All right, so first, just like when designing a program, you kind of need to do a needs analysis, and you kind of need to see how much recovery you need. And so that's based off of how much intensity you have in your exercise kind of regimen. So if you work out, let's say twice a week, you may not need a lot of recovery. You may just have that active recovery those other days you're not working out. If you work out 5 to 6 days a week, well, then you better make sure you program in that recovery. So it can become very, very important. So one thing to also look at, and I know I'm at fault with this too, is when designing a program, you have to see that a workout day and a rest day are of equal importance. They are both extremely important, and you can't look at a rest day sometimes as like, oh, I don't need that, or oh, I'm feeling fine, or you know, it's important to listen to your body and also recognize how much work you might have put in the day before, or even that morning, or maybe what work you're going to need to put in later in the week. And so always kind of seeing those as equally important is very, very important. So we get to this fun looking guy. I am definitely going to say his name wrong, but we'll give it a shot. So this is Han Sales or Sales, and he created kind of this, I guess, what is it? I'm trying to think. Created kind of this protocol or this kind of program called GAS. And so this is called the General Adaptation Syndrome. And so this is how our bodies adapt or respond to stress. And so one of his famous quotes that I really, really like is it's not stress that kills us, but our reaction to stress. So you think about it in kind of a modern world example. Let's say you're allergic to something. Let's say you're allergic to bees, okay, or hornets or some type of insect. And that bee or insect, you know, lands on you, stings you, and now it's injected the allergen into you, and now your body is reacting to that stress too much. It's too much of a reaction. So you might get really puffy cheeks, you might get hives, your chest might get really tight, you might need something called epinephrine, where it kind of reverses the reaction of that allergen. But that's kind of an extreme example, of course, of how our bodies might overreact to stress. In kind of the more modern example, I guess, would be looking at our everyday work life. Obviously, it's changed a little bit in the past couple months, but looking back, you know, if we have a lot of chronic stress, that chronic stress and our reaction to stress and how we kind of respond to that stress and supplement with that stress and cope with it all can lead to obviously bad habits. And hopefully you're here tonight because maybe you recognize some bad habits with recovery, you want to learn more about recovery, and that's what we're doing tonight and everything. So we're going to be looking at kind of the GAS syndrome. And so again, this stands for General Adaptation Syndrome. So this is one diagram that I'm kind of into colors and stuff like that. So if this helps you, you guys can see my little mouse as it's dancing around. So here, first we got our phase 1. This is obviously the stress has been introduced to the body or to the nervous system. So let's say you're standing there and someone pushes up against you. So, okay, you've responded to it, you know it's there. All right, and then kind of that phase 2 is that onset shock. So let's someone bumps into you and you take a step back. So you kind of balance, and that's your step back or a step down if you kind of look at the diagram. All right, then phase 3 is going to be, okay, well, now you're going to kind of push back a little bit. You're going to say like, okay, like you bumped into me, back up a little bit. And then after that, if you can recover and you're good to go, then you're ready for the next stress stimulus and you'll be fine. Or if it's too much of a stress, you may get kind of bumped back. And then when you try to push, it's too heavy of a load and you'll come crashing down to the ground or something like that. So that's kind of a physical example, but hopefully you can apply that to a little bit more of a mental example as well. Maybe phase 1 is you get a new job, okay? And then phase 2 is they dump a lot of work on you. And then phase 3 is you get all the work done. or you may result to phase 4 and the work is too much. And now you're working over hours and you can't get enough sleep and it starts to kind of take over a little bit. So this is kind of our body's natural response to stress. And we want to avoid phase 4 if we can, or learn how to bounce back after we do get into phase 4. All right, so another diagram to kind of look at that you may find a little easier is, so here's your resistance to stress on the side to the left. Here's our stages at the bottom. You have your initial shock, okay? And then, again, a normal level response, you're going to respond to stress, whether you like it or not. Your body has a natural response, and that's perfectly fine. But then we don't want to reach stage 3, where we start to get to burnout or exhaustion, or something we're going to talk about, which is overtraining. So we will kind of adapt this also to a lot of our adaptive sport athletes, and what that looks like when you're in season and you've got practice after practice after practice and 3 games a week and just more and more and more. So now we kind of jump into what is the difference between overreaching and overtraining. And overreaching can be something good in the short term. Overtraining is something in the long term that can be very, very negative. So overreaching, kind of as these definitions say below, it's very short term. It's kind of like on those days where you're going through your workout, maybe with Coach Chris or something like that, and he gives you a really hard exercise and you push yourself to absolute exhaustion that day. He gives you, let's say like 4 miles, and then you got to do some ball slams and then some extra pushes, and it's just a lot of work, and you kind of overreach, and then that night you're absolutely exhausted, and the next day you kind of wake up and you're like, I think I overdid a little bit. That's okay. That's going to be a natural response again. That happens to all of us. I know that happens a lot to me when I'm doing kind of outside work or hiking. I'll think like, oh, I can get to that next hill or that next mountain. And then I'll get to the mountain and I'll be like, I overreached a little bit, and now I've got to rest even longer to get back down. So it can be beneficial as we talk about that kind of mental toughness as coaches and increasing that discipline and everything. But we want to make sure that we're not putting too much of a stimulus on us that might get us hurt. So now we kind of get into what happens with overtraining. So overtraining can result in injury, and it can also suppress your immune response. So let's say you train really, really hard, then you have practice right after that, then you have a game the next day, and let's say collectively you've gotten maybe 10 hours of sleep over 2 days. Well, that's not enough sleep. And so we'll kind of talk about that too, how that affects your muscle building qualities later on. But overall, your immune system really needs sleep to function at its highest capacity. So getting enough sleep and getting enough rest is a really good way to make sure your immune system is going strong. All right. So again, how do you know if you're overtraining? We're going to look at some of these. So lack of enthusiasm, elevated heart rate and lactate threshold at rest, chronic fatigue, psychological staleness, and decrease in performance. So we'll break down a couple of these. So let's say you're a wheelchair basketball athlete, okay, or you're a wheelchair softball, or you're swimming a lot, and your season comes up and you're really pumped for your season, and you get through the first 2 weeks, and then after the first 2 weeks, you just kind of feel, like nothing really excites you. You don't really want to go to practice anymore. You're just tired all the time. You just kind of want to break. You're just kind of burned out. And that can be a sign of maybe you're overtraining. Maybe it's like, hey, coach, I may need some time off, or I'm not feeling that well, or that's something to talk about with your parents too. And just kind of listen to your body as you go. I really encourage my athletes to work at different sports. So like for me personally in high school, I played a lot of basketball and baseball. And so baseball was kind of my mental sports that I really focused on my mental game and kind of how I thought about things. And then basketball was more my physical sport. So I worked on that kind of agility and quickness overall. You need them for both sports, but to kind of not get burned out on one over the other, I took a break from those sports. And that's why also sports try to work out off seasons overall, to make sure that kids aren't burning out or that you're going to result in an injury, okay, for overuse. So now we get into kind of the periodization. So how do you program recovery? So we look at something called tapering. So tapering just kind of means taking back or decreasing to a certain extent, all right? So how do you put a taper week into that macro cycle that you've been working on with Coach Chris and everything with, you know, these are my sets and reps, these are how many things I'm going to do this week, and et cetera, because you still need to focus on your rest overall, all right? So hopping into it, some benefits of the taper week, and again, I love these little pictures that Coach Chris kind of put in here. We've got a really, really buff minion. That's just awesome. But no, sometimes that taper week can give you more energy and can overall let your body function better. So you've kind of, nothing in life is really linear. And so what I mean by that is nothing is from point A to point B in a straight line. I wish it was like that where, you know, everything was just in a straight line. It was kind of like if then this, then boom, you're done. But unfortunately, a lot of the times, and this goes back to the GAS syndrome, the general adaptation syndrome that we were looking at before, where you kind of do a little climbing and then you have to drop down and rest. And then you climb a little bit and then you drop down and rest. And it's not necessarily a step back, but you're just pausing. And through that pause, you are going to lose maybe a little strength or a little flexibility or mobility or conditioning. But in that brief little pause, the amount of gains you'll get from that will increase too. I kind of like to use the analogy with a lot of my athletes as I've watched a few videos and looked into how people climb Mount Everest. It's one of the, obviously the tallest mountains in the world and everything, and it is very, very difficult to climb. And so the way you climb Mount Everest is you don't do it in a day, definitely not. And so they climb and then they rest and they kind of hunker down and they get in a safe spot where the winds aren't going to hit them too hard or the storms aren't going to hit them too hard. And then when it's clear to go again, they'll climb a little more. And then they drop down into maybe a safe kind of cavern where, again, the storms or winds can't get to them necessarily. And then they'll climb some more. And so that's kind of what it looks like when building a strength program. So you've got 3 weeks, and this kind of leads to our next slide here. So my first week is my introductory week where I'm learning the movements, I'm getting to know them more, I'm kind of getting used to the movement patterns, I'm kind of figuring out the weight I need to use for each exercise. And then the second week is like, all right, I've learned them, let's turn it on a little bit. So we increase the load, we might increase the reps, the intensity goes a little bit higher. Then the third week is kind of that mental toughness week where it's time to test. It's time to, okay, how many either reps can you do? How strong are you? Increase the intensity. And this is where it's okay to do a little overreaching, as we talked, a little bit of acute short-term overreach. But then that fourth week in that mesocycle, we look at the taper week. And so basically a taper week, for this example, we're going to reduce it by 50%. So if I was pulling a weight that was 100 pounds, well, on my fourth week, I'm still going to pull that weight, but I'm going to drop it to 50 pounds. And you may say, well, that's going to be super, super easy. Yes, it will be. But after 3 weeks of high intensity, my central nervous system needs that break so I don't get burnout. And then I can come back stronger next week. And I might be able to do 120 pounds or something like that. And then we look at the next fourth week when I'm doing those pulls again, and now I'm pulling 60 pounds because that's 50% of 120. So taper weeks are very, very, very crucial. All right. So now we're going to look into different recovery modalities. So now we've programmed how and when to recover. Now it's like, what can I use to recover? So there's lots and lots of different types of recovery modalities. So this is just, again, another funny picture that Coach Chris threw in there. I really like this. It says, rest day, where is my rest muscle and how do I train it? And it's got a big muscly guy with weights and everything screaming. And it's not so much about, you know, sometimes rest can mean doing nothing. And so that's kind of our no physical activity, all right? But then also we talk about active rest. And so active rest can be very, very crucial as we dive into it. And let's say one day you're doing heavy squats or heavy shoulder presses, then the next day is your quote unquote rest day, or it's in your taper week. And so instead of doing heavy presses, go for a little run, go for a little push, go for a walk, and kind of figure out just light physical activity. Do some chores around the house, just move. And through this, you get an increase with blood flow. It reduces your overuse injuries because you're doing different movements from the day before. You get a huge psychological relief, which, again, if we go back, we kind of look at some of the signs of overtraining might be you just feel aloof about some things. You don't really want to go to practice anymore. You're kind of burned out. And so by taking these rest days, especially active rest, where you can go hiking or enjoy this beautiful, beautiful state we're in, this can be great for kind of your mind overall and just your internal motivation. All right, so now we're going to talk about some flexibility and mobility. And so we all need to be flexible and mobile. You can be as strong as you want, but if you can't move, then what's the point of the strength, okay? Just like we'll take wheelchair basketball, for example. Let's say you've got a really, really nice shot and you can reach all the way up and get a good flick on the ball and everything, but then let's say you go work out for 3 to 4 months and you don't have that same reach. Well, now you may not be able to get over some players that now they can swat the ball out of your hand or they can block you a lot easier because you've lost that reach because you didn't increase that flexibility and mobility in your shoulders and in your back and your arms overall, okay? So flexibility is super, super important. We are kind of made to move, especially for athletes. We really try to work on, no matter if they've got some hardware or anything or some injuries they're working through, we can still work on range of motion as best we can, all right? We kind of go back to the overall principle of fitness, and that's one of the big things of the principles of fitness is being flexible and being mobile and trying to take your joints through best it can full range of motion, okay? So there is two types of stretching. Well, 3 types of stretching. One I'm not a huge fan of, but you can certainly try it. There's dynamic, there's static, and then there's something called ballistic. And so we'll kind of cover ballistic first because it's one of my least favorites, but again, you can try it. Sometimes it does work for athletes, especially athletes that have a high tension in their muscles. So like sprinters might need to do ballistic stretching to make sure they've got the spring in their step, or really make sure their muscles are kind of active and turned on. So ballistic is kind of, think of it as almost a bounce. So you're kind of, maybe you're bending over and stretching your hamstrings, or you're pulling your arm across your body and you're kind of tugging, you're kind of getting a bounce to it, if you will. Versus static. Static is almost the opposite, where you're gonna, let's say, pull your arm across your body and you're gonna hold that stretch. And you might hold it for 30 seconds, you might hold it for 60 seconds. Some yoga poses are static stretches, where other poses, and this kind of leads into our next one, are dynamic. And so dynamic stretching is more for kind of the warm-up. So a lot of warm-up exercises, if you think of like forward arm circles, or I call them Frankensteins, where you're walking and you swing your leg up real high and you try to touch the toe and then touch the toe, or you're trying to step over a hurdle, or you're working on kind of those external rotations with the bands, etc. That can be kind of a dynamic stretch to not only warm up your muscles, but also stretch your muscles into a good range of motion. We always want to do dynamic before we work out, and we want to do static after we work out. And the reason being, because static, sometimes if we hold a stretch too long, all right, it could decrease our strength, or we might stretch too far, or we're looking for blood flow, we're looking to kind of raise your heart rate, and static is kind of more there to sometimes lower your heart rate and relax a little bit. So think dynamic is kind of fast and upbeat. Static is more calming and soothing. Both can be difficult. Both can be very difficult, but those are the differences. All right, so now we're going to look into a little bit of yoga and meditation. So yoga has some very, very good qualities. I am not a huge practicer of yoga. I've tried it before. I have liked it. You might like it, so I'd give it a chance. There are lots and lots of yoga videos out there that you can watch from home. And it can be good overall to work on posture and work on kind of muscle strength and endurance overall as you shift your weight from maybe one foot or one hand to the other. And it can be very good for overall injury prevention, as yoga is not usually very fast. Usually it's very methodical, very purposeful, very, I wouldn't say necessarily slow, because I guess I'd say flow. They work in kind of a flow motion. So they might go from a downward dog to a child pose, but it's not a jerking fast movement. And then with it, it's usually can be combined with meditation. So meditation is kind of that psychological side where we talk about reducing stress. We focus on breathing. If you've taken any of the stretching classes at Ability 360, we really work on that breath. We try to focus on kind of just relaxing and bringing our heart rate down and our blood pressure a little bit. All right. Other kind of tips that we'll look into is nutrition. So we're going to dive into a little bit of, hey, you know, what kind of food should I eat post-workout? And so instead of grabbing that maybe bag of chips or snacks real quick right after you get done working out, you got to think about your goals. If your goal is to, let's say, lose weight, then after a workout, getting something that's quality food, not necessarily quantity of food, is very, very important. And quality kind of always matters when it comes to, especially after our workout, we want to make sure we're putting back in the good nutrients and kind of repairing the muscles and all the work we've done. So Coach P, Coach Chris, and I and everything are very adamant about this, as we always want to make sure we're getting solid food first. Okay, so before you dump down a protein shake or something that you're not really sure what's entirely in it, get some chicken, get some rice, get a good meal of solid food right after your workout. All right, or you can also talk to a registered dietitian or a nutritionist about this. So now we kind of dive into some corrective exercise and foam rolling modalities and how to use these, what to use them for, and etc. So foam rolling kind of became very popular a few years ago. And so imagine you have a rubber band and you're kind of playing with that rubber band, you're bouncing it back and forth and everything, and then somehow, some way you tie a knot into it. Okay, so you tie a knot into it and you keep tugging on the rubber band. That knot becomes tighter and tighter and tighter, almost to the point where sometimes you can't get that knot out. But the best way to get a knot kind of out of a rubber band is you kind of roll it between your fingers. And that's almost kind of, in a very simple way, what foam rolling is. So we have muscle everywhere in our body. It used to be that, you know, muscles were just kind of attached to bone, but we now know that muscles are surrounding our blood vessels, they're on our nerves, they're fully encasing our bones, they're everywhere. So it's very important that we pay attention to kind of sensitive spots or high irritability spots, if you want to call them, or also they're called trigger points. So if you have a spot on your leg where it's maybe soft or where it's tender to touch a little bit and you feel a really tight kind of muscle there and you're not necessarily flexing that muscle, so sometimes you can feel them in your forearms. You'll feel little knots here and there as you go across, and you might feel them in your hands, depending on what you do for work, etc. But foam rolling can kind of help break up those knots. And so by putting pressure, I think this is the next slide. Yeah, so here we go, how to apply foam rolling. So the important thing with foam rolling is we want to be purposeful. We want to be very purposeful with foam rolling. So we're diving into it, and let's say it's your hip or your shoulder and you've got a knot. Okay, so you got a trigger point there, all right? Never, ever, ever foam roll on a bone or something that's really hard on your body. You want to try to hit the meat spots, so where your muscle is. If you foam roll over a bone, you're gonna feel it. It's very, very uncomfortable. I've even known some people to sometimes chip or bruise their bone with foam rolling. So just be careful with that. Make sure you're trying to hit the muscle and not the bone. It's very important that you foam roll. You can do it before, you can do it after, but it's very important that it's purposeful. So if you're gonna get down on a foam roller, make sure it's something that you know where you're gonna foam roll. It's either your back or your chest or your legs. And sometimes you may not always need to foam roll, so that's okay too. But there's lots of different kind of massage techniques, and foam rolling is one of them that you can kind of use to get some knots out. But again, just to stress, it's very important to have purpose when you foam roll. Now we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, sleep. So all of you wheelchair basketball athletes that work with Coach P, I know he gives you a hard time about being on your phone at night and everything, and that's what we're going to talk about today, of why it's so important to shut off the devices and turn off the blue light before you go to bed, at least an hour before you go to bed, to help your body kind of get ready to sleep. So why is sleep important? And this is one of my favorite types of questions, is why should you care? Why should you care that sleep is so important? I mean, everyone talks about it, but no one seems to get enough of it. But this is why it's important. So it helps with so many different functions, but as an athlete, you should care because it helps with your metabolism. So how you process and absorb food. It can help with memory. So if you have to remember plays, or if you have to remember where to go on the court, or you have to remember certain times to be at a game, or let's say, I know Coach Robbie could probably vouch for this, but let's say you got to remember both of your jerseys for one game, and you only grab one because you only got 5 hours of sleep. Well, Coach Robbie's not going to be very happy with you. So make sure you're getting enough sleep for memory too. Same thing in school. Like if you're looking to kind of tackle big assignments, or sit down and write a paper, or you've got projects coming up, it can greatly improve how you learn from those projects, how you adapt to those projects, and how you get through those projects. And then obviously, this is kind of a no-brainer, which I'm sure you guys know, but sleep helps with restoration and recovery. Sleep can help I would say sleep can help almost every aspect of your life for sure, whether you're an athlete or not. So what happens, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what happens if you don't get enough sleep? What happens if you get sleep deprivation? You have an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. You have an increased risk of metabolic diseases, such as how you absorb insulin, how you kind of process carbohydrates and fats and everything like that, because your immune system's not working right and your hormones are all out of whack. So it can play a huge, huge role into how your body functions overall. And then of course for athletes, the reason why you should care is you're not going to perform as well. And if you don't perform as well, you know, what's the point of being an athlete? We want to perform well, we want to get stronger, we want to get faster, we want to get bigger, we want to do better in our sport. That's why we're competitive. So by not getting enough sleep, you're kind of throwing your whole season down, and you're letting your team down and stuff like that. So take care of your body and get enough sleep. All right, so this is a study that Coach Chris looked into. This is looking at sleep deprivation in rugby players. So if I read it right and everything, is basically they looked at it and they found that they took two groups. So one group, they let sleep after 2 rugby matches. They took this group and said, okay, after 2 rugby matches, you're exhausted, you're tired, you get full 8 hours of sleep, all right? Then they took the other group. And they said, we don't care what you do, but you have to get less than 4 hours of sleep, okay? And what they found, I think they did this either once or a few times, but they found even after a couple hours, like 16 hours after the match and everything, excuse me, the recovery was way, way more significant in the people that got sleep versus the people that didn't. And so I know that comes off as like, well, of course, Luke. But also what's very interesting to look at even closer is there were higher levels of muscle damage in the sleep-deprived group. So again, you have both groups doing the same amount of work. So these guys played 2 matches of rugby. These guys played 2 matches of rugby. But you found more muscle damage in the second group. So not only did they not recover their muscles, but their muscles were more damaged overall, which can lead to injury. And we really, really don't want injury, especially in our athletes, because if you're injured, that means you can't play or perform optimally, okay? So now we get into a little bit of the hormones and kind of dive into what happens with sleep deprivation, okay? So if you don't get enough sleep, it can actually hurt your muscle growth. If you look at a lot of Olympic lifters and people who have a lot of muscle or they're very, very strong, they'll tell you that a lot of their training revolves around their sleep cycle and sleep system. And when they are on the road maybe, or they're trying to compete or something, they'll get there a few days early before the match or their competition or something like that to make sure they have enough sleep before their competitive event, okay? And overall, like over time, your body will actually start to atrophy. It will actually start to lose muscle. And this is something that Coach Chris and everything talked about in the nutrition video and the nutrition lecture. Is muscle is expensive for your body. Muscle costs a lot. So to maintain muscle requires a little bit more energy. So as we're diving into this and you're not getting enough sleep, let's say your body has to choose between, okay, we've got to either fight off an infection or we've got to keep all this muscle. Well, it's probably going to dump the muscle and it's going to do its best to try and keep your immune system running and fight off infections, okay? So if you don't want to lose or deplete your muscle, I'll say it again, get enough sleep, all right? One of the big hormones that goes down that really, really decreases if we don't have enough sleep is testosterone and growth hormone. And this is especially important for kind of our adolescent athletes. So any athlete that's in middle school, high school, and even college, and you're not getting paid to do your sport, all right, you're gonna need all the hormones you can get to, first of all, grow up as an adult, grow into an adult, help your body perform the necessary functions to grow your bones right, grow all your hormones right, grow your muscles right, and et cetera. And so this is very, very important for overall hormone function. And a lot of people we're starting to see have a lot of hormones that are all over the place, not only due to either food that they're eating or sometimes processed foods can affect that a little bit too, but also because they didn't get enough sleep as a kid in middle school and high school. So now that they're an adult, you're going to become an adult whether you like it or not. Your body will grow into it. But whether or not your hormones are there, that can be a big thing. And I know personally for me, I could probably be a lot better now, better off, if I had gotten more sleep in high school or even in middle school, okay? All right, so now we kind of look at the metabolic function of sleep deprivation and what it does metabolically. So this is kind of where it gets, I would say, almost a little scary. And this is where it might touch home personally to you or personally to someone you know. So if you don't get enough sleep, you may not be absorbing, again, as we talked about, kind of hormones of insulin, or you may not be producing insulin, or you may lose your sensitivity to insulin. So that can lead to diabetes. That can lead to obesity. You might actually gain weight due to sleep deprivation, because your body, again, will get rid of muscle, and it's kind of in that fight or flight mode. It's in that stress mode. That cortisol is up, and you might start gaining weight, or you might start holding on to that water weight more. And so again, becoming healthy and becoming fit and everything, we obviously say, like, get out there and exercise, but obviously there's way, way more emphasis on what does your diet look like and how much sleep are you getting. Very, very important. All right, so I kind of like this picture that Coach Chris kind of put up. It's a brain on a bicycle. It's kind of creepy, but I kind of like it a little bit. But he's got little shoes on and he's pedaling away. And this is kind of our next research article. And so in this one that Coach Chris found, basically, I think he found that in the study they took sprinters and people who worked with kind of that fast anaerobic kind of exercise, and they found that with a lack of sleep, it severely decreased their performance and actually made them very, very higher for injury. I'd have to look into this article more, but basically what they came off of it from was, if you want to be kind of an anaerobic athlete, or if you want to train optimally, they found that a minimum 10 hours in bed per night increased sprint times, shooting accuracy, and faster reaction time. So greater sleep, even over the recommended 7 to 8 or 7 to 9 hours that people recommend. These people were getting a minimum of 10. I don't think in my personal life I could say I've ever gotten a minimum of 10 hours of sleep. But a minimum of 10 hours, like, significantly increased performance in almost all functions, okay? So now we kind of address what Coach Chris talks about to the wheelchair basketball team, of getting off the phones before bed, shutting down the computer, turning off the TV for at least 30 minutes to an hour before bed. And these are kind of tips to getting really, really, really good sleep, all right? So we want to try to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep per day. I think this is especially important for middle school, high school athletes, because you're growing. I would say definitely for college athletes, because you're not only going through your sports and your school and everything, but you're learning how to be an adult. And then obviously for adults too, because we're working, we might have to drive somewhere. We don't want to be falling asleep at the wheel. So it can be very, very important to get enough sleep. And through all of this kind of presentation, I'm guilty of this too. I don't think anyone's got their sleep habits perfectly down, but we're all kind of working on it, and this is something we could all improve on, I think. But being consistent with your sleep schedule is kind of the next step. So going to bed at the same time every day lets your body know around the same time, like, okay, it's time to wrap this up. It's time to kind of wind down a little bit, versus if you go to bed at 3 a.m. or you go to bed at 6 p.m. or, you know, all of these different times, your body never knows when to shut down exactly. One of the big keys that Coach Chris likes to talk about is leaving your bed for sleep. So if you're like me and you live in a tiny apartment, and kind of your bedroom might have been turned into the office and might have been turned into your gym a little bit and everything like that, it may be hard to do that for you, but I don't work on my bed. I don't watch movies on my bed. I only use my bed for sleeping. And so that's one way to kind of designate part of the room or part of your house where that is the room I sleep in, and that's it. And so when you walk in, just like you walk into a gym, your body realizes, like, okay, I'm about to do a hard exercise bout. Or you walk into a stadium with a bunch of fans, you're like, okay, I'm ready for entertainment. Same thing with your bedroom. You walk in with a psychological response of, I'm getting ready for bed, you know? We've talked about eliminating electronics enough. And obviously right before bed, it's not advised to do a huge workout right before bed. I know sometimes me personally or other people I know, they'll try to do a workout right before bed to get tired. And what that actually does is it amps you up. And so doing more of your higher intense exercises in the beginning of the day is good, but doing them later in the day can have sometimes a negative effect, all right? And then just to stress this one more time, but we want to be tired. I know sometimes we get caught up as a society, we'll complain about being tired, like, oh, I'm so tired, oh, I can't do this. And we actually want to be tired so you actually sleep a lot better. So doing those high intensity kind of exercises in the morning, hopefully by the end of the day, you are tired and you can get to sleep like that. You just put your head down on the pillow, boom, you're out for 7 to 9 hours. You wake up rested, ready to go again. So wrapping it all up now, all right, we looked at program design. We talked about tapering. We looked at recovery modalities such as nutrition and foam rolling. And then we talked about making time and be consistent as far as like setting up a sleep schedule, how to get to bed, and kind of what to do for that. And then when we talked about, you know, designing our program for sleeping better and recovering better and maybe stretching a little bit, have a purpose with that. So go in knowing what you want to do. And then always recognize that recovery is just as important as that working out. So something Chris is working on right now through his doctoral program and everything is how sleep affects kind of muscle damage overall. So he could probably speak a lot more to this, but we obviously know that sleep can affect muscle damage, but he's trying to look at the numbers and kind of the statistics side to it, if you will, and actually present and show you data that yes, it does affect muscle damage. Some fun things that ASU, Arizona State University, is doing for sleep labs and looking at how sleep affects our cognitive function overall and everything is they are building, it looks like, a sleep or a chronobiology lab, and they're kind of looking into that more of how not only our reaction time with sleep improves, but also overall functionality will improve with what type of sleep we get. So I'm guessing in some of these labs, they could put a lot of blue light in it, kind of what we see from our screens, and they may say, how does someone sleep with blue light, et cetera. But that's kind of looking forward into the future. So thank you so much. Again, I know this is kind of Coach Chris's presentation and everything, but thanks for listening to Luke present a little bit. We're going to open up the floor to some questions and go for it.
There are, Luke, it's Brielle. There's 2 questions. One question is the recommendation to associate bedroom with bed or eliminate electronics? Is that to prevent insomnia?
Oh, good question, good question. So I would say kind of seeing, obviously, your bed as a place to sleep, but also if you can, take blue light out of your room, okay? So I had a TV in my room for a long, long time, and I took it out, and I've actually slept a lot better. And so removing blue light from your room, so laptop, closing it down, like putting the lid down so it's not going to flash in the middle of the night or something like that, or turning your phone over so blue light doesn't come into the room, or even using a warmer light filter on your phone so it's more of a yellow light instead of a blue light. That's what I would kind of recommend.
No, I thought there was a second question, but it was helping answer that other person's question.
Oh, gotcha. All right. Paul, did you have a question?
I did. We were doing a chair. I was doing the different classes of adaptive adventures, and so some of them are some of the classes they're having us do. Like I think the one yesterday they did a chair one, and so they were having us do the chair yoga instead of the sitting yoga. Is there a different way of doing yoga when you do the different yoga classes?
Yeah, so there's several different versions of yoga and that meditation that we talked about and stretching and everything. So that's kind of the fun part about recovery is there's several different modalities of how
They
you
were
might
doing it on
want
the
to do
chair.
it.
The lady instructor that I had was doing it on a chair.
And that's fine. That's perfect.
I have another question, Luke.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about sleep and water weight, like something about, was it testosterone and water weight? I don't remember. Something
Yeah.
about how you can't get rid of water weight. And could you say more about that?
Yes. So my screen is still shared. I think I have you guys pulled up on my screen too. So I'm just going to move you over to the corner. But no, so yes, so with stress and everything, when we do get stressed, we can, not always, but we can respond by taking on kind of water weight. And again, that body will kind of see like, okay, do we want to keep the muscle? Do we want to keep the fat? And it usually kicks the muscle out because the fat, as Coach Chris has talked about on nutrition calls, fat has more energy with it. So it has a higher energy kind of total we can use it for. So that's actually with the higher cortisol levels, if you can see my little mouse wiggling over. So sleep restriction of 4 hours for 6 nights increased it impaired glucose tolerance. It gave a higher cortisol level overall, and then increased sympathetic activity. And with the increase in sympathetic activity, what that means is that's kind of that insulin unresponsiveness or insulin sensitivity loss that we've talked about before with like diabetes and so on and so forth. Does that kind of answer your question?
Well, I know you said something about like your body retaining water because of like something to do with the hormones and your like sleep deprivation, like because you don't get enough of, was it growth hormone you said? It was on that slide you were talking about growth hormone, and you just said it was that you can actually retain more. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, so that's actually, it's not necessarily growth hormone or testosterone. It's more the increase of the hormone cortisol. And you get an increase of the hormone cortisol when you have a decrease sometimes of testosterone or growth hormone because your body's responding to chronic stress versus acute stress.
I see. Okay, thanks. I
Yeah.
didn't know that. Okay, I have another question.
All right.
So, if you are chronically stressed or have a chronic illness that causes stress, and you tend to be falling asleep in the afternoon, but you still end up falling asleep at night as well, does that do anything to the body's, like, does that change the cycle at all or confuse your body if you're like passing out in the middle of the day, even though you're still passing out at night? Like, does that mess up your body's cycle with sleep? Or does it just mean you desperately need more sleep?
Right. And so, and Brielle can chime in on this a little bit if she would like, but she doesn't have to. But so this can kind of come down to, I would say, it could be medication. Sometimes medication can affect sleep. It can be what
or
your
the desire for medication. Unfortunately, I don't have any medication, but I would like some. No, this is just, I think if I had medication, I might sleep better at night because I do have a significant amount of pain at night, and I'm pretty sure that does decrease my sleep quality. But yeah, I do sometimes find myself, and in past years when I was recovering a lot from surgeries, I was constantly falling asleep in the afternoon, and so I do still find myself getting really tired, like wanting to take a nap, and I try to avoid I try not to fall asleep because I'm afraid it's going to ruin my sleep cycle later. But I wasn't sure if if this talked about maybe too much sleep, like, is there such a thing?
So yeah, there's a lot to address with that, but no. So medication can cause either too much sleep or lack of sleep or something like that. Also, it depends on what, first of all, your chronic stress is. If it's work or if it's kids, or is it a high chronic stress? Is it just kind of a low chronic stress? It's still stress that your body is responding to. I think overall too, we can look at, there are some sleep conditions out there that like narcolepsy, where people instantly fall asleep, or they have to take a nap or something like that. I know I had a friend in college who he could sleep probably 18 hours a day and still be tired. And I personally didn't understand that, but that's just something he kind of had, and that can be due to, again, a hormone imbalance. It could be the way the brain is perceiving rest. It can be, there's something with sleep that we talked about on slide 30, or maybe it wasn't. No, I think it was, yeah, so on slide 30, where we're talking about kind of sleep deprivation with a minimum of 10 hours and everything with that study, there's a thing called rapid eye movement, or REM sleep. And so when you're in that kind of, I don't know if you know this, but when you sleep and you go into really, really deep sleep, you move your eyes really fast. They kind of go back and forth. And that's when you're in really, really, really deep sleep. And so I don't know a ton about sleep, but from what I've read and what I've seen is you kind of drop into these REM cycles. And so you'll start, kind of drop into your REM cycle, then come back up. And that was your first one. And then you might drop back down to the second one and then come back up. And then the third one is kind of your deepest one. That's when you're going to get your most rest, your most function, where your body's going to totally repair everything and get things working again. And then hopefully you come out of that one. Sometimes, depending on your REM cycles, if you wake up in the middle of a REM cycle, you can be really groggy and like it doesn't feel too good. Or when you wake up and you're right out of that REM cycle, your body's like, I feel great. That was great. Or we should do that again.
Also with chronic conditions and, neurological conditions, that it's very common for that chronic stress, the stress of the condition, that will cause you, like you were saying, the naps. And so that's what your body needs to recover, because it's working harder, because it has to work for that condition, whatever it's affecting, whatever condition it might happen to be. So that's most likely why you're feeling those naps. And I wouldn't fight it. If you need it, your body is so smart. And so it's sending those transmitters to that brain, like, I need to sleep in order to finish my rest of my day. Now, the pain thing in sleeping, that's a whole, another conversation, because you don't want to have pain while you're sleeping at night. So that pain first needs to be managed, if possible. I know it's not always possible to be managed first, so you can have that going into those cadences and certain types of sleep patterns. And Danica, I can give Chris some of your questions, because that's what he's doing his doctorate on, sleep and sleep patterns and so forth. So I'll send him your questions and see if, or I'll link you two up, and then he can maybe go into some more depth with that with you.
Yeah, thank you. I would appreciate that. I know my nutritionist that I'm working with right now said, she told me that that growth hormone increases about 90 minutes into your first, like when you drop, I think that's right, Luke, when you drop down into your first REM cycle, that's when your body produces the growth hormone, or 90 minutes in. And she said, that's one of the things that if you eat late at night, your insulin will spike and your growth hormone will not, like, you won't produce that growth hormone, and that's part of your recovery. And that's why so many people say, like, don't eat before bed. I had never understood the science behind that. And now that I do, I was like, oh my gosh, I really should have been doing this. But so much of my, when I was going through a lot of my surgeries, so much was like, I was just trying to stay awake through the evening, and eating was one of the ways I stayed awake. So I was eating too close to bedtime, and I've stopped doing that. But I thought that was really interesting. I've never heard that about the growth hormone. I didn't know. So that was good information.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, brand new information to me. I did not know.
All right. Well, it is about 6 o'clock, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our kind of hashtag Adapt at Home, Move United kind of lecture series. Again, sorry Chris couldn't make it, but he should be back next week for another lecture, hopefully, and we'll keep learning. So thank you.